Let's talk about...
Coercive control.
Right.
Not the good kind.
Coercive control, I'm going to set this out. Is it a woman problem? Because this is legislation going in front of Parliament in Canada, which has pretty much tri-party support, which means nobody disagrees with it.
Right.
And interestingly enough, this legislation was brought up in 2019, and I was very concerned about it. Had a first reading, then disappeared. And now it's back.
And it's back in a big way. It's in the House of Commons today. They're reading, and tomorrow they're voting on it. So tomorrow's the big day, June 11th, where, as you said, three-party support. This is likely going to go through.
Nobody is against it. And so one of the things that was interesting about when this bill first came out and had its first reading was there were a bunch of feminist groups that had deep concern with the legislation. And so to explain this, we need to talk about what is coercive control.
I was just waiting for that cue because I've got it all highlighted and ready.
Ready? You go.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Coercive control is a pattern of violent behavior, although not physical, that seeks to take away a person's freedom and to strip away their sense of self. The person using violence creates a world in which the person experiencing coercive control is constantly monitored and criticized. Their every move is checked against an unpredictable, ever-changing, unknowable rulebook. Sounds like a control freak to me.
Gaslighting is a big problem with coercive control too, in which gaslighting is a situation in which somebody tells you that your memory of what happened is not correct, and they cause you to doubt your own perceptions of the world around you.
Well, let's give a few examples, right? In case, I'm sure people know, but here's a list. Depriving someone of their basic needs, monitoring their online communications using spyware, controlling how much money they have and how they spend it.
Who does that?
Who does that?
Men or women?
No comment. Repeatedly putting them down, humiliating them, calling them names, telling them they are worthless, threatening to kill them or their pets. I've heard about that. Damaging property or household goods. Just the list goes on. I think we all get it.
So the problem that feminist groups had with when this had its first reading was they were very concerned that women might find themselves caught up in the criminal system because coercive control, is more...
Swings both ways.
It swings both ways, and women tend to control subvertively.
Example?
So, they use words and manipulation to make you think that something is your fault, and then they get power through a back route, right? Which, in my research came about because women typically in the history didn't have access to power, so they found other ways to get power.
Or physical strength and power, right.
Coercive control is a great description for how women found ways to manipulate and get power through using third parties and using manipulation. Okay. And so this was a concern for feminists that women would find themselves being charged with a crime if coercive control was to come into play, because women are more likely to use coercive control than to use physical violence.
Okay, but why now? The Canadian Bar Association, in their response to this, has said, we've got laws that govern these behaviors. There's intimidation charges, there's threatening charges, any number of charges someone can be charged with for this kind of behavior. So why this, why now?
Stalking, harassment, all these other things.
All this other stuff.
Right.
So why?
Well, because there's this big push, and this is a phrase that you see over and over again in the presentation of this legislation, is we need to deal with gendered violence, right? And so they're finding ways, and this has been a constant issue for me, in that women are infantilized. And they're saying, women become victims of coercive control, even if they're not being physically disciplined, because apparently they're just weak in the brain. I just take such great offense.
I wasn't going to say anything.
But I can.
I know.
Because I'm a woman
who
grew up in the feminist era.
That's right.
Right? And I take such great offense at this idea that women are so weak in the brain that they can't defend themselves either, physically. Right. Yeah, there's challenges there, because men are built differently. Physical, they're stronger. This is the reason why men and women don't fight each other in boxing, and they have different leagues. because we're built differently or whatever. But women have their own way of getting to power and manipulating and driving people crazy, gaslighting them, coercive control. Absolutely. Women are very vulnerable to being charged with this if men, and this is the big if men were willing to come forward and admit
Right.
that they were the victims.
Of course.
This is the problem. Men don't like to admit they're victims.
Never.
Apparently women are proud of it.
Right. And we're all tough guys, apparently.
Yeah, and women are weak.
But again, why now? Like, why? Like, I'm reading this Canadian Bar Association response to this, and they're saying everything's in place to prosecute these types of crimes. In fact, in Britain, and I think Scotland also has this, they're finding rates of prosecutions are quite low because it's hard to prove.
Well, hard to prove. That's interesting. But one of the big problems with this is it's way too broad.
Yeah.
Because you need to know if your behavior is actually a crime.
Right.
And coercive control is so broad in the description of what it could be that, you could just be simply asserting yourself and suddenly you find out that being assertive is coercive control and you're guilty of a crime.
Right. Well,
how do you define it? How does somebody know if they're committing a crime?
Right. Say your partner's a drunk, right? He or she wants to go out to the liquor store.
Happened.
Wants to go to the liquor store. You say, no, you're done for tonight. Give me your card. Give me your keys. That could fall under this new legislation potentially. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of scary.
Well, it's even broader than that. If somebody says, or else.
Well, that takes it next level, obviously, because now the threat of violence.
No, not necessarily.
Just a generic or else.
So that's the thing with coercive control. It's not. It doesn't have to do with violence. You can be, or else I won't talk to you for 2 days.
Or else I'll keep your card for 2 days.
Yeah. Well, that's financial control.
Right.
But but it could be and that's a little more clear, right?
Right.
If somebody's controlling somebody else's debit card and financial transactions,
or car keys, whatever. Yeah.
That's you can see the control there. But does this not cover, or else I won't talk to you for 2 days? Is that not coercive control?
True.
Because people have emotional needs in a relationship. At what point? So this is the slippery slope.
Exactly. Right? We talked about this.
Well, we have before, but not for a while. Slippery slope. I mean, it's interesting because the slippery slope is considered a logical fallacy, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can say, oh, well, if you allow this, then it could end up in this drastically crazy thing where everybody's locked up in prisons, right? And disappeared from the world. Right. And that's a slippery slope, saying you're going from one simple thing to something dramatic. But a slippery slope is actually a real phenomenon where you give an inch, they'll take a mile, right? But in law, aside from logical fallacies, in law, it is important, like I said before, for a person to know whether or not they're breaking the law. And I just don't think this legislation is clear enough for people to know if they're breaking the law. Are you allowed to say, or else I won't talk to you?
Yeah, I know. It's very, very vague. And don't forget, this has also crept into family law as well, right? So it's rearing its head there. So very dangerous stuff. Let's look at some of the, look at the actual legislation. So some of the obvious ones are coercing or attempting to coerce the intimate partner to engage in sexual activity. Okay, we know that.
But again, though, how many people have not been in a relationship where they go, oh, come on. And it's like, no, I'm not really in the mood. They might change their mind, right? I'm sorry. If they change their mind, are you guilty of a crime because you asked more than once?
Exactly.
Where do we draw the line?
There's no lines in this legislation. That's the problem. Or, controlling or attempting to control or monitor the intimate partner's actions, movements, or social interactions. What does that mean?
Okay, now this one I get. And it's kind of insidious when this happens. And I've seen it from both genders.
But this is stalking, isn't it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Where somebody's in a relationship and they're trying to go out and have a nice time with friends, be it male or female, and then all night long you're getting text messages from your partner saying, where are you?
What time will you be home? Yeah.
There was a great little comedic bit, actually, from, I think it was Britain's Got Talent. It was like, I have to nag myself. I get home and I go, what time do you call this? Why don't you do the dishes?
Right.
Sometimes I think I don't appreciate myself.
Yeah, but again, does that rise to criminal activity?
Well, that's the question, right?
No, apparently not.
At what point
Apparently it'll be answered tomorrow in Parliament.
At what point does nagging become coercive control?
Right.
Because I can nag myself. I do every night, actually. I have trouble falling asleep, so I'm nagging myself all day long. Maybe I'm guilty of coercive control to myself.
Yeah, what are some of the... Oh, here's a classic one. Controlling or attempting to control the intimate partner's expression of gender.
Oh, well, that's strange.
Physical appearance.
Right, yeah. You shouldn't wear those clothes. We had a case, actually, that Joseph and I worked on in one, where that was part of a pattern of coercive control.
That's right.
A battered spouse,
right,
in which she actually took all of his old shirts that she didn't like and made him cut them up to do an art project. She made him cut up his own shirts.
It's recycling.
And then it was, she was saying, oh, those shirts are basically like, ugly. You suck, you don't know how to dress yourself, you're ugly.
Keeps going. Manner of dress, diet. You got to lose weight. You got to lose weight. No one ever tells me that, by the way. Taking of medication or access to health services or to medication.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a bizarre one because,
right,
people can be on medication that their spouse can be legitimate concerned about.
Right, yeah.
And again, that gets to, where do you call that, controlling?
Right.
And where do you just call that,
concern
about a partner or whatever?
Right.
And then how, it's so subjective, right?
Totally.
So somebody can be nagged about something that's maybe good advice, and their partner might be telling them that because they're concerned about them.
Right.
But then all of a sudden the other person can say, my subjective response to that is, you're trying to tell me how to live my life, you're trying to control me.
Right.
So where do we
I know. Attempting to use or threatening to use violence against any animal that is in the care of the property of the intimate partner.
Well, the threat to use violence in any format.
It doesn't have to be limited to the cat.
As you mentioned, that's a separate crime. Uttering threats.
Right. Again, so
uttering threats can be against the person directly or against a third party. Right. There's there's a bunch of different charges that can already be laid on that.
Right. So that's why I'm kind of nervous about this legislation.
Overbroad.
Right.
So let's talk for a second about what it means to be overbroad in legislation. Why is that important? Why should we be concerned about it?
Because we're going to get arrested at some point. That's why.
Because anybody can be guilty of a crime without knowing it.
Exactly.
So overbroad means that the legislation is intended to catch certain types of acts.
Right.
But the wording of it is so overbroad that it can capture things that are not criminal in nature.
Okay, but how have we gotten here? You said you've studied this, how we've gotten here. Why are we here?
There are certain groups, I'll call them feminist groups, who have sought to create legislation that turns women from victims, which I don't see women as victims. I see them as quite strong, to tell you the truth. It seeks to turn women into constant victims and find as many ways as possible of giving women the ability to put a man in jail.
Okay.
And this is that type of legislation. This legislation was crafted by, as they say, people interested in gendered violence. And when you hear that term, it always means violence against women.
I was going to say, tell everyone what that means. So
there's no gendered violence legislation that's meant to protect men against violence.
Okay.
Zero. There's not a single law outside of just don't murder people.
That's a good one.
Things like that, right?
That's a good one.
There's no special legislation designed to protect men. Gendered violence always means women. And these women are looking to find as many ways to give women the power to put a man in jail by simply saying something, because it apparently protects women. And I have a big problem with this, because the best way to help women protect themselves is to teach them, one, how to speak. Because apparently women can't speak, even though we use how many more words a day than men?
Do you?
I'll show you right now.
Oh, God.
I can use a lot of words. I probably use more words in this podcast than you do. There's no reason a woman can't use words.
Right.
Now, there are some circumstances where a certain word might get you killed, right? But that's not specifically, who gets killed more, men or women?
Women, no?
If we're talking about domestic violence or whatever, that's apparently statistics, but generally men are involved in more crime, and men are the victims of crime more often, right?
Right.
So men are typically, not just the victims of crime more often, but are also more likely to die at work and all these other things, right? We don't pay attention to that. All we care about is women's apparent inability to say no, women's apparent inability to do anything to protect themselves, and apparently women who decide to get themselves into a situation where they can't leave because they take zero responsibility for their own economic wealth.
Right.
And so now they're stuck in a relationship because they can't get out. Well, why did you do that?
Right.
I'm not allowed to ask that question.
Right.
So anyway, that's my rant.
That was kind of a short rant for you.
Well, I could go on. I just thought it was time for me to end for now.
I'm just trying
I will pick it up again later. I guarantee you.
So how do you see this being prosecuted? You go into a police station. My ex has my car keys and won't give them back. Is that he's done it a few times. Is that
you know how they're going to end up getting charged with this? The feminist groups have all these websites out there that literally tell people how to get their spouse charged with crime.
Yeah, I know. That's the Diana playbook. You've told us about the playbook.
Literally tell them, and they can get free legal counsel at all of these centers to tell them, oh, you can get out of this relationship and take all of their possessions and get custody of the children and do all this other stuff if you follow this little playbook that we've crafted for you. Here's the little book.
But doesn't this make things more complicated for women?
Complicated how? Well, they get everything they want as soon as they say it. How is it complicated?
He threatened me versus, well, there's been a pattern of conduct over the past month that's consisted of the following.
What's the complication? They go to court and the guy ends up not being convicted because the charges are so weak and the evidence is so weak or whatever. But in the meantime, they win everything.
Like, what do you mean?
They get him charged.
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
They get their revenge.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to pay his legal bills.
Yes.
He gets acquitted, which is our experience.
Yes, usually. And she
pays how much consequence?
None.
Zero.
But again, I keep harping on this. It just feels like this is going to make the job of the police more complicated. Can you imagine a complaint that comes in? A nice, simple threatening death versus, he threatened my cat, then he threatened this, and he kept my car keys last week, and this is the pattern. So some poor police officer is going to have to sit there and say, okay, pattern of conduct. Does this equal a pattern of conduct that falls under this legislation?
As you know, through my nonprofit, I've said before, I get contacted by police. They're very frustrated.
Yeah.
Because they have no charging policy discretion. So it doesn't complicate the police's life. The police are frustrated because they have to lay charges as soon as somebody says something that would amount to a crime. What it complicates is the burden on the legal system.
Well, this also complicates it for them because now they have to assess the pattern.
No, the Crown, it's different in different provinces, but no, the Crown decides. The police just have to lay charges as soon as the statement is made that could be a crime if it was true. They have to assume it was true, and then they have to. This is what they've told me. They're frustrated because, they have to lay a charge, and then they have to wait for the Crown to decide if they're gonna. The Crown's the one who makes the decision.
No, I know, but I'm just saying.
Also, what we know is the media is looking at the prosecution rates, and they're saying, oh. There's no justice for women because they haven't laid enough charges.
Right.
And then the burden is where? The burden is on the accused, who's being charged with something with no proper investigation. And the burden is on the legal system, which is overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why it seems to me this is very mercurial, if I can use that word. I haven't used that word in a while.
That's a great word.
Isn't that a great word?
Yeah.
Max liked it. No, because, again, this pattern recognition. Now we have to train police in pattern recognition. Does this equal a pattern or not? Do two incidents equal a pattern? Last Friday he kept my car keys, and then on Monday he took my bank card. Is that a pattern?
Does he do it every Monday?
Well, these are going to be the ridiculous questions versus he grabbed my hand, he took my bank card.
He once did this.
Assault. Fine, but at least
Then I was verklempt.
like it seems
Great
like,
Jewish word.
It is, but just
I love that.
the amount of
Kvetching, verklempt.
the amount of additional burden of analysis this is going to put on law enforcement is going to be insane.
I know. And, we do have a serious problem, especially with the pandemic, backlogging the courts and everything. And now we're going to charge everybody with everything that anybody ever said, whether they meant it or not. And
like controlling or attempting to control any matter related to the intimate partner's employment or education. What does that mean? No, you can't take my card today. You have to take the TTC. I'm controlling you. Like, what does this mean?
this means,
Here we go.
this means that women are apparently so helpless
Right. That's what
in our world that they need the government
Right.
to step into our private lives and our bedrooms, which we have a great quote from
Yes, we do.
a previous prime minister. The government needs to stay out of the bedrooms of the citizens. Apparently now women are so helpless and so infantile
More so.
that they can't even figure out how to speak, how to do anything, how to take action, how to find a job,
Right. Well, of course.
how to pay their own rent.
Right. I don't know what's going to happen with this. It'll be
Now we
very
need to have
interesting.
men charged because men take care of women, and now it's their fault because the woman's trapped underneath the man. Seriously, that's the way I'm starting to see it, and I'm simplifying it.
It's okay.
Right?
We get it.
Because
We
there are a
get it.
lot of strong, independent women out there who should be proud of themselves. But I'll tell you, when I go back to high school reunions, they laugh at you when you pay your own bills.
Why?
Because there's like, oh, I got a guy who pays all my bills for me. You're an idiot. You actually work. And that mentality is why I'm so angry about the way these things are playing out.
It seems to be a
Because
pattern.
women make choices. Women make choices.
Right.
And women are not generally stupid.
There's a few
And
exceptions.
we're treating them like they're stupid.
Right.
And now we're saying the government has to come in
Right.
and stop women from being taken advantage of because they're stupid.
Right.
Now, if you're a woman out there watching this, it's time for you to tell people you're not stupid. We need to have women speaking up for women. We don't need male protectors. Women are strong individuals.
Right.
And we don't need this legislation to stop us from being victims of ourselves.
Right.
So I can't see any other reason this legislation is being passed, because they're all talking about gendered violence, violence against women, always violence against women. You know what? There are a lot of male victims of violence. And we have domestic violence by Donald Dutton back here. We know for a fact that most domestic violence is reciprocal. And we know from people like Erin Pitsey, an amazing activist, women's advocate, started the first women's shelter in UK, that she discovered that women who were engaged in domestic violence will create violence if you don't stop them from doing that.
How so?
That they could go into a relationship come out of they give them a shelter space or whatever, and they would go find another person and turn a non-violent person violent. They said women have this, this violent aspect of themselves. We need to address that. And her dog got killed by feminists.
By who?
No, seriously. You should look it up. Erin Pitsey. She had to leave the UK because the feminists wanted to silence her so bad from her telling the truth about domestic violence that they killed her dog and she had to go to Australia.
Well, that's
for a bit.
crossing the line.
So it's crossing the line. But that's how rabid these activists are. They're single-minded and they don't care about facts. And the facts are women are just as violent as men.
And controlling.
And if this gets passed,
It will get passed.
I encourage men to pay attention, keep logs, document your abuse, and have them charged.
Well,
Let's see how they like it.
we'll see how the police react to this too, right? There's going to be a culture shift. They're not used to this type of law.
And it's so broad.
Right.
It's so broad, the legislation. Women are going to find themselves in a lot of trouble. Or else they're going to have to become better people.
Whoa, choices, choices. On that note, it's pillow talk time.
If you like this podcast and you want to hear more rants,
You're not even holding the pillow. You know how much I spent on these things?
don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share.
There'll be a follow-up episode, no doubt, after this legislation
I need to hug this
passes
pillow
tomorrow.
now.